I'm a bad, 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 bad boy.
I moved to Australia with my family when I was a kid and settled in Queensland, North Queensland, in a place called Charters Towers, one-horse town up there. Got my first band ever in that town, called In Session, and then moved to Sydney when I was 19 permanently. Had a couple of little bands there, and then I joined a band called Velvet Underground, which was a Australian Velvet Underground. It's one of the top bands in Sydney. Before that broke up, and two of the boys joined Ted Murray, became TNG. After Velvet Underground split up, I answered an ad in the Sydney Morning Herald for a rock singer. And whilst I was in Velvet Underground, they used to talk about a former guitarist who just left before I joined, called Malcolm Young. And Malcolm, they said, was the younger brother of the famous George Young, of course, from the Easy Beats. And they used to talk about the little fella. And I thought, little fella? We weren't that tall ourselves. And they said, no, the real little fella. So I didn't really know much about Malcolm, but I knew he'd been with the band. So when the band split up and I answered the ad in the paper, the person on the other end of the line said, oh, what's your name? I said, Dave Evans. And he said, it's Malcolm Young. And I said, oh, Malcolm, hey, how you doing? And so we were pretty excited. We'd been in the same band, so we knew we liked the same music. Malcolm said, oh, look, I'm with two other guys. I'm with Colin Burgess on drums from the Masters Apprentices, the famous Masters Apprentices. Oh, wow, that's pretty good. And with a friend on bass called Larry Van Creek. And all we need is a singer to form a band. Do you want to come over and jam with us? And I said, yeah, of course, yeah. So that afternoon, Saturday afternoon, I went over to Newtown to a disused office block, and I met Malcolm for the first time, and Colin sitting there as well behind the drums, no shirt on. I can see him now sweating. A really cool guy, Colin Burgess, and Larry too. Larry, the bass player, I hadn't met him before. So let's just jam. So we just did Free and Chuck Berry and Rolling Stones and stuff like that. Stuff that we virtually were doing in Velvet Underground anyway. So we just jammed on that, and sounded great to me. And after about 4 songs, Malcolm just looked at the other boys and said, he's happy for me to join. If they are, they went, yeah, cool. And then they said, well, how'd you like to join us? And I said, yeah, it'd be great. So we shook hands and we had a band. And we all went out that night and got drunk and went to Checkers nightclub, all that sort of stuff. But about a week later, at a rehearsal, Malcolm mentioned that his younger brother, Angus, who had a band called Kentucky in Sydney, he said that Kentucky had broken up and whether Angus could audition for us. And we said, yeah, that's fine. And then Angus came to the next rehearsal and just jammed with us, And then Malcolm says, is it okay if Angus joins? And we said, yeah, sure, no problem. So we shook hands, and then the band went from 4 to 5. And that was the lineup of the band before we did our first show. We still didn't have a name at that stage.